Sometimes, I find myself looking back on my student days with a sense of longing. It was a time when so many unusual things happened. But don't get the wrong idea, friends. I'm not feeling bitter or disappointed just because life has lost some of its old excitement. I've become a more settled man now, a father who only feels a rush when returning home from work to be with his family, my wife, my kids, and the couch. If anything, my curiosity for new experiences has only grown. However, I now view the world with a calmer, sometimes more cynical perspective. Imagine how a pathologist approaches a new case. No emotional attachment, just quietly noting the interesting features of tissue necrosis or the expression on the deceased face. At my age, there is no room for miracles, but there is still plenty of room for fascinating phenomena. My previous passion for life has taken a more measured form. I now carefully choose my paths, avoid unnecessary risks, and would rather make a few observations from the sidelines than dive into some reckless adventure. But there was a time when there was a team and adventures that I still recall while sitting in my comfy chair, sipping coffee and enjoying homemade Charlotte. We called ourselves simply Square. We walked together, studied together, and played ghost hunters together. We were huge fans of the movie by the same name. At one point, we even talked about getting a dog and naming it Lizen. We were just kids, even though we were all 18. The Institute had its fair share of alternative types, even without our group. We blended into the background, often looking like local stalkers. People thought we were harmless geeks and laughed at us, but it never led to any real conflict. By our third year, our group fell apart. Xenia was expelled for poor grades, and a month later, he joined the army. Then, I dropped out. Love had entered the picture. Faced with a tough choice between the most beautiful girl in the world and two oddballs obsessed with mysticism, my feelings took the lead. Strangely enough, I found new friends right away. Meanwhile, Kolya and Surya kept playing their supernatural roles for another 6 months. Sometimes, I blame myself for what happened to Kolya. If I had gone on that ill-fated mission with them, maybe things would have turned out differently. They ventured into an abandoned depot, just 10 kilometers away from the city, a bad place known as the Iron Cemetery. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but Kolya was brought to the morgue in multiple plastic bags. So Yoga was in a state of shock, rambling nonsense during questioning, and after the investigation, he ended up in a mental hospital. The police ruled Kolya's death as an accident, and that is all it was. It took a long time for my interest in the supernatural to return. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, mysticism crept into daily life. Even my wife came to accept my odd fascination. My return to this old hobby, however, was a quiet one. Photos, forums, YouTube videos, TV shows, and occasionally, walked through cemeteries with a camera. Things took an unexpected turn when an unknown number called my home phone. The usual melody played, and the caller ID showed 11 stars. A sense of unease crept over me. I missed the first call, but it rang again a minute later. Annoyed at myself for hesitating, I finally picked up. It was a voice from the past. Xenia had tracked me down through some college friends and wanted to meet. We had not seen each other since he went to the army. Things had gotten complicated after that. Honestly, I was not expecting to hear from him. We exchanged some polite, empty words for about 10 minutes before agreeing to meet in the city center for lunch later that week. I wrote down his mobile number and, with little enthusiasm, gave him mine. On Wednesday, Xenia called me, and an hour later, we were sitting at a small round table in one of those faux Russian bistros, ordering business lunches. The conversation was not flowing well. Maybe it was my fault. I found the past heavy on my mind, and the man sitting across from me felt more like a stranger. Xenia had changed. He'd gained weight, and with his fancy trinkets and clothes, it was clear he'd become a successful businessman. His words sounded like background noise, and I could not help but wonder why I had even agreed to this meeting. Awkward silences filled the air, and I had to apologize for zoning out, joking that I must be showing signs of old age. Xenia, or rather, Evgeny Viktorovich, as he proudly introduced himself, had turned into a snob. He went on and on, gossiping about our old friends, sneering when someone he disapproved of was revealed as a logical loser. The more he spoke, the more I wanted to leave, but then, out of nowhere, his tone shifted. The ironic mask dropped, and he looked genuinely concerned as he asked, "Do you remember Suyoga? We have not seen each other since the funeral. What happened to him? I heard he came into some luck after the madhouse, got an inheritance, got married in the excitement, bought a house outside the city, somewhere in Kramery. But then, something went wrong. His wife left, but the women did not stop coming. In fact, he started ordering escort girls every day." Xenia lowered his voice to a whisper. "For the whole night." "Really? You're kidding, right?" I smiled, imagining Suryoga enjoying bachelor life. "And how do you know?" "What do you think, Dim? I told you, I've been running a modeling agency for 2 years now. Well, he was one of my VIP clients." "And?" I grabbed the thread, bracing for something terrible. The girls started complaining, saying something was not right there." "Well, that's typical for a guy who's living it up." I tried to joke, but it fell flat. "It's not funny. At first, I thought they were just high or on something. So, I sent some of my guys to keep an eye on them. And they all vanished, disappeared without a trace. The investigators found nothing." "And Sergey?" "Not my client anymore. I passed him off to my colleagues, and not a single escort went back to him after that." "Is that everything?" "No. I got a call from a cop. There is a maniac in the area. Girls are disappearing. Do you think it's him who's killing them?" "That's what he thought. That's what the cops thought. Yesterday, they found our friend hanging in his place. He'd been dead for a week, and he left a note. It wasn't me." The expert said he took his own life before the first girl disappeared in the area. "Well, yeah, we need to go there." I looked at Xenia and shook my head silently. No, I did not want to step into that hellhole. "As you wish. I just thought you would be interested." "No, I have not been interested in a long time." I lied easily. It did not feel hard at all. We said our goodbyes soon after. Life returned to normal, and I quickly forgot about our meeting. There was nothing about it that needed remembering. Still, peace is a fragile thing, and even eternal peace is not guaranteed to everyone. It was a gloomy autumn day, with rain tapping against the windows, and my cat, curled up with his nose hidden deep in his fur, made it clear with his whole demeanor that the bad weather was here to stay. The phone call broke my peace, forcing me to disturb the cat and get up from a chair. The hallway was chilly and dark, but the glow from my phone's display was enough to light my way. Pressing the cold receiver to my ear, I heard a rough, hoarse voice. The man quickly introduced himself. I winced involuntarily. I still had not gotten used to the shift from the militia to the police. The investigator asked a few standard questions, all focused on Xenia's disappearance. It had happened the very weekend after our last meeting. I told him I had no idea where to find my missing friend. He politely suggested they could invite me for a more in-depth conversation at a government building and hung up. If they really wanted that, they would have invited me right away. It seemed like just a formality. I went to the kitchen, brewed myself a cup of coffee, and began sipping the bitter brew as my thoughts spiraled. The more I pondered my friend's disappearance, the more a sense of fear grew within me. The realization that all of my old companions in our shared hobby were now dead filled me with a creeping dread. This fear transformed into an unsettling obsession. For a moment, I lost control. My mind and body no longer felt my own. I had heard of this state of effect before, but this was the first time I had truly experienced it. Moving almost in a trance, I began preparing to leave. By the time I snapped out of it, I was halfway to Creamery. I did not know the exact address, or even the best route, but something inside me just knew that is where I was headed. The highway stretched empty before me, the wet asphalt darkened by the rain that had soaked into it. The landscape around me evoked a sense of melancholy. The November sun, hidden behind thick clouds, cast a weak light that stretched the hours of the day into a perpetual twilight, a haze between dawn and dusk. Half an hour later, I turned off onto a country road, following the signs. To my surprise, a stretch of gravel road, about 1.5 kilometers long, led me all the way to the outskirts of the village. At that moment, I realized just how reckless my impulsive decision had been. Creamery was a typical Dacha community, one of many that had sprung up during the chaotic financial collapse of the 90s. The houses looked more like strange palaces or fortresses. Amid these giants, unfinished mansions often stood out. People had built according to their own means, prioritizing individuality over any sense of architectural harmony. On the edge of the settlement, where it met the railway, older, even ancient buildings had been left standing, relics from the time where this had been a simple village. But the overall vibe of the place felt off. A quick glance was enough to tell that the wealthy owners did not stick around for long. I stopped at the entrance to the area. The rusty barrier and vacant guardhouse did not shock me. I had to continue on foot, looking around, trying to figure out which way to go. The yards were empty, and there was not a soul in sight. I wandered aimlessly for about 20 minutes, navigating through a maze of houses of all shapes and sizes. The silence and emptiness no longer frightened me, but they did begin to irritate me. Then, quite suddenly, a neat wooden house appeared ahead. The gate was open, and a light shone through the window. My luck seemed to change, and the feeling of danger that had crept in earlier evaporated. With a sense of relief, I stepped up to the door and knocked. There was no answer. I pulled the door towards me, and it opened quietly on its own. The putrid stench of decaying meat hit me like a slap to the face, making it nearly impossible to fight the urge to vomit. The thought of finding the owners of this grim place disappeared instantly. Yet, there remained a faint, desperate hope for help, urging me to move towards the window where a dim lamp glowed. Pressing myself against the cold glass, I looked into the room. It was the kitchen. A single bulb hung above the stove, casting a weak light that did little to fend off the oppressive darkness creeping through the rest of the room. The shadows seemed to move, giving the space eerie, living quality. I needed to leave, but just as I turned to go, there was a crash, followed by the clinking of dishes from inside. Then, in the low light, I saw a figure. A shape, barely distinguishable, began to rise. It swayed unsteadily as though drunk, and lurched toward the window. The bluish, bruised face of the figure came into view, and I screamed. It was Xenia. His lifeless, twisted body, with its pale eyes and protruding tongue, was unmistakable. I turned and bolted toward the abandoned car, my hand shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I pressed the horn, but the doors refused to open. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps. Something enormous approached, sniffing the air. Then, right beside my ear, came a growl, guttural, displeased. No, bring Grandma. Kolya is hungry. I froze, paralyzed by fear. Even more terrifying than the sense of some monstrous presence was the fact that the voice, distorted and unrecognizable, belonged to Kolya, a friend who had died years ago. I could not move. I was snapped out of my stupor by the sounds of gunshots and screams. I fell to the ground, hands pressed to my face, trembling. When the shooting stopped, an OMON soldier, the special military police, fully geared up and armed, appeared from nowhere. "This one's alive. Pull him away. The creature is gone. We wait for it to come out again," he said, his tone almost accusing. Two men, in plain police uniforms, no insignia, led me to a hidden operational vehicle. I was barely aware of what was happening, too disoriented to resist when an elderly man in civilian clothes handed me papers to sign. "Well, that's great. Now, it's in your best interest to forget everything, and I'd recommend going to a church," he advised, his voice cold. They put me in the car and instructed me to drive home without stopping. I don't know what anyone else would have done, but I went along with it. At home, I told a half-truth about an urgent call, then collapsed into bed, overwhelmed by the experience. The tension and shock were stronger than any sleeping pill, and sleep claimed me quickly. The next day, news broke of a fire in the elite holiday village. I hoped it had burned to the ground. As I watched the footage, I could not shake the memory of Collier's death. The investigation had concluded he was crushed by a press at the abandoned depot, his remains reduced to a bloody mess of flesh and bone. But now, I'm not so sure about that version of events. The truth? I don't want to know. I just don't. This tale begins in a very ordinary way, with a visit from my father-in-law, a seasoned geologist with over 40 years of experience. He had been through thick and thin in the wilderness, faced countless hardships, and had heard all kinds of stories from his colleagues. As a man who had been through more than most, he was not the type to be easily surprised by professional tales. Yet, I managed to do just that. The story I shared with him was not some fantastical legend, but a medical case, though it was odd enough to raise eyebrows. The patient, who had been recovering from serious injuries, was doing physically well. No frostbite, no lasting fractures. He was healing fine, but the strange part was his behavior. Despite his recovery, he refused to wake up from his delirium. He mumbled incoherently, repeating one phrase over and over. "Black helicopter." This, I noticed, caught my father-in-law's attention. His expression changed, and he became uncharacteristically somber. It was then that he revealed something I had never heard before, despite knowing him for over 25 years. Apparently, among geologists, there was a legend, an almost sacred secret. When a group found itself in dire straits in the wilderness, with no way to communicate with the outside world, there was always the possibility of summoning a black helicopter. Even if their radios were damaged or completely out of service, if they knew how, they could still call for help. And that help would come. A black helicopter would appear, with masked figures in polar gear who would help load the injured or stranded members into the helicopter's belly. But there were some caveats. These people who flew the black helicopters were enigmatic and silent, and it was best not to argue with them. They conveyed orders without words, and everyone instinctively understood what they needed to do. The strange thing was that no one knew how many of these helicopters or their crews there were. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, and when they did, there was no time for questions, only action. But the helicopter always did something odd. It would take the whole party, everyone who was willing to fly. However, only one of the group members would ever be brought back to civilization. The others would disappear without a trace. No one knew what happened to them. It was brutal, almost supernatural fate. I then shared with him that the patient I was treating had indeed been found alone on the outskirts of a taiga village, a place he had gone to as part of a larger expedition. He was the only one to return. The rest of his group had vanished, and all that was left was this man, delirious with fever, and constantly muttering about a black helicopter. I asked my father-in-law if he had ever heard of someone refusing to fly in one of these helicopters and surviving. His response was quiet and somber as he reflected for a moment before replying. It happened to me a long time ago. 6 of us were out in the field. Our party chief, a rotten bastard, dragged out the season longer than we should have. By the time we were in trouble, the rain and cold had taken a toll. I had a broken leg, 2 had pneumonia, and the rest were not in much better shape. We had no communication, food was running out, and they would not even start looking for us for 3 weeks. That was the deadline the party chief had given. And that bastard called in the black helicopter. He continued. I was lying there, broken and furious with him. I wanted to shoot him, but they had already taken away my gun. I refused to get on the helicopter though, on principle. I knew that if I went, there would be no chance to settle the score with him, but at least if I stayed, there was a slim chance. And what happened, I asked, as my father-in-law paused, lost in the recollection. Nothing. The event saved me. They arrived when I was about to give up. I managed to get the bastard arrested, though they were torturing him. No witnesses though. I never mentioned the black helicopter. I just said that he had abandoned us, his helpless subordinates. He only got 8 years for that, and I've heard of the black helicopter many times since. I've even seen it in the sky a few times. Whether it was watching over me, or if I had some strange ability, I don't know. I hesitated, cautiously asking. Maybe they were just regular helicopters. My father-in-law only smiled faintly, shaking his head. Believe me, you can't confuse it with any other helicopter. Neither on the ground nor in the sky. The longer I live, the more I wonder what is inside that helicopter and what happens to those it takes. Sometimes, I even regret not getting on it. I thought, screw him, the party chief, but then again, your Alenka would not exist, and I would not have seen my grandchildren. That is what keeps me from going too deep into it. He gave a small grin and added, and so, for a time, I even specifically asked to go on risky expeditions. I would not have called for it, but I would not have refused either. Just don't tell Alenka and her mother. They would get angry. It is all in the past now. I know I am more needed here, and that is how it is. And so, his story concluded. Another secret from a life of hardship and strange experiences. The black helicopter remained a mystery, its origins and purposes known only to those who had witnessed its eerie presence in the wilderness. Got a little story to tell. When I went in the woods, in the Black Hills, be me at 22 years old. Decide to drive off into the hills and camp out in the woods in the summer to blow off steam. Bring along my MK4 Lee Enfield and my grandpa's .38 revolver, because mountain lions. Pack a weekend's worth of food and water, as well as all the other necessary things, maps, flashlight, ammo, etc. Head out Friday morning. After about 4 hours of driving around, I finally find a relatively good spot near a dead end, around a mile or 2 west of Beretta Road, if you know where I'm talking about. Leave truck locked and hike maybe a kilometer further south. Unpack, pitch tent, play clarinet in the woods like a massive dork. End up doing some light exploring. Notice some tracks, deer, and what looked like coyote prints. Realize night is coming soon, and prep accordingly. Make fire, etc. At this point, the sky is orange, and the hills start doing their eerie shit. For people who don't know, there is a reason it's called the Black Hills. Some time passes, mostly spent keeping warm and reading. Put out the fire, and I am about to go to bed, when this buck bursts out of the woods, seemingly from nowhere, into my clearing. The trees are too close for it to get its antlers through. It bashes them against the clearing in deranged desperation. I am bolted upright, with Miley shouldered, aiming at it through the tent. It just fucking drops on the spot dead. Nothing touched it at all, just sorta falls limp with a pathetic whimper. I am thoroughly spooked because I've never seen anything other than a human have a heart attack. Hear what sounds like distant yelping, and suddenly a horrible scream, as if something was being eaten alive. Intense spookage.jpg. This is not common at all, and I am genuinely scared for my safety. Eventually drift to sleep after 3 hours of nothing. Wake up around daybreak. Smell this horrible smell, as in rotting meat. Figure it's the buck and realize I was an idiot for not dragging it out of my camp. Make for the tent exit. Unzip. Its bare skull is at the step, with its body parts torn to bits. Chunks of meat with tufts of hair scattered about. Its guts line the perimeter to my clearing, its organs neatly in a pile on top of my fireplace. At this point, I am trying not to throw up when I notice probably the most frightening aspect of the entire display. The ground was smooth as a baby's butt, like evened out, no footprints or anything, totally flat. Completely overtaken with fear and revolt, I throw up what felt like a week's worth of food and curl up like a baby, crying for half the day. Decide to finally just move out and go home. Pack up and start hiking back to my truck when I notice something off in the distance. Another ring of guts in another clearing, a ways off from my little path. Look around frantically, noticing more and more. There has never ever been reports of this shit happening here. Decide to camp out in truck Saturday night to see what happens, since I am more curious than disgusted now. Nightfall, try to keep from dozing. Hearing more yelping in the night. Another horrendous scream. Catch some Z's and check out everything Sunday morning. Go back to my former campsite to find it picked clean with the undisturbed dirt but no buck. Getting chills, I hike uphill a bit. Find nothing. Go back to the site. Place reeked of copper. Not believing the whole skinwalker shit, I investigated but found nothing. Decide I'm done with it all. Go back to my truck. Take off back home. My face when the F&W service told me they found mauled animals around the area I camped at. Not eaten, just mauled. My face when I found a mauled deer in a clearing just west of my house. Pick related, my shits. Found the deer yesterday when I went hiking with my nephew. I've been fortunate not to have been a part of any encounters like this, or at least, not that I can recall from memory. The only thing that comes close is this. Be me, about 10 years old, ate dinner, whole family, me, mom and dad, about to go to bed early. While we are turning off all of the lights, doorbell rings. Guy asks if he can use the telephone. My dad tells him no. Guy insists on using the telephone, claims his car broke down, won't work. My dad explains it is late and he is not letting him into the house. Dad suggests a payphone. Guy walks back to his car. My dad stands there, watching him. Guy comes back to the house. Guy begs to use the telephone and let him in, as he has no money. It gets weird by this point, because we are in rural areas with tons of other houses to ask this. Dad tells Guy there is a payphone at the convenience store down the street. Guy asks if the woman across the street might have a telephone. Dad gets irritated and claims he will call the cops if he does not leave. Guy calmly apologizes, gets in his car, turns it on, and drives away. In the broken car that doesn't work. As a young child, I was severely confused. Thinking back on it, did he have a fetish for me as a kid? What the fuck was going on? There were tons of other houses. What was this guy trying to do?